Welcome to my True Scary Story YouTube channel. If you're new to Sinful's horror stories, please be sure to subscribe now for future content. And if you would like a story of your own featured on an upcoming video, shoot me an email from the email in the description box below. Please make sure to leave a like on this video as it will help perform at a much higher level and it will reach that many more people. Sit back, relax, enjoy, stay sinful. I originally posted this on No Sleep because I didn't realize that it was a place for fictional stories. This story is true, so I don't feel that it belonged there. Anyways, this is my story. We witnessed the aftermath of a murder. It was a dead in the middle of summer, and this night was particularly hot and humid. My friends and I were staying up all night as we did many times, especially in the summertime. I was 15 at the time. I'm 23 now, a rather petite female. Anyways, my friends were staying over for the weekend, and we were all out in my pool house. We usually hung out in there because it was like having our own house all to ourselves with no parents, although my mom would often check in. I lived out in the country, a slightly rural area but a small city within a 10-minute drive and a small 24-hour cafe within a 10-minute walk away. We had been sneaking drinks all day and were pretty buzzed when we decided to take the walk to the all-night cafe just after midnight. We collected ourselves and set off giggling down the street en route of the cafe. Halfway down the street we noticed a man and woman out in the pitch black darkness, arguing rather loudly and pushing each other. We were at the top of the road and the driveway went down a steep hill and was very long, so their view of us was distorted. We paused for a moment and watched as the arguing seemed to calm down, and the two went inside the house. At this point my friend Jennifer realized that she had left her wallet, so we would have to turn back to get it as she was paying, and the only one with cash on her at the time. We all begrudgingly turned around and headed back to get her wallet, giggling and joking about the man and woman we saw arguing, trying to guess what they might have been arguing about. We came up with some pretty stupid things, the things you might expect a teenage girl to come up with. It didn't take long for Jen to grab her wallet, and we were on our way back within 15 minutes. We had just made it halfway back up the street when we saw a van pulling out of the driveway that we had seen the couple arguing at. It pulled out and drove by us very slowly. We were super freaked out but tried to remain calm as it drove on past us, picking up speed as it drove away. We finally made it to the restaurant and ordered. We spent some time in there talking, laughing, and just having fun, and by the time we were leaving, the whole couple arguing thing was already gone from our minds. It wasn't until we were turning down the dark street that I live on that we remembered the creepy guy in the van and the events that had transpired earlier. This is when my other friend Kara points out that the van is still gone. She said, "Maybe we should go peek in the window, see what she's doing." We had come up with the idea that she was probably cheating, so this was the reason for Kara's bright idea. Even though I was a little nervous, I didn't want to seem like a scared little girl, so I went along with it. We head down along the side of the drive, as to stay in the shadows and hide. We were stumbling and giggling and shushing each other all the way down. Kara speaks up and says she'll go peek while we keep lookout. That's when I notice Kara backing away slowly with a horrible look on her face, tears streaming down her cheeks. She clasps her hand around her mouth and looks at Jen and I and mouths, "Let's go, right now." We stand there confused as she grabs our wrists and says, "Run, now!" We all take off asking her what the fuck is going on as we run. "That lady," she says. "I saw her, she was laying on the staircase, covered in blood." "Oh my God, she was dead," Kara said. Neither of us believed her. We gave each other that look and broke from her grasp, sneaking back down to the drive to have a peek for ourselves, and that's when we realized I should have listened to Kara. I'll never forget what I saw. It looked nothing like the stuff you see in horror movies. The blood was dark and everything looked surreal. Time stopped momentarily, but Jennifer's piercing scream brought me back to reality. We darted back up the hill screaming. Kara stood there waiting, but before we could speak, we noticed the van steadily approaching us. He must have seen us coming out of his yard, so we continued to run as fast as we could, but he jerked the van around in time and caught up to us just as we were running through my yard. He saw us. He continued driving extremely slow, and then turned around and drove back, heading back to his house. We were freaking out about what to do. "Do you guys think she was for sure dead?" I asked him as Kara proceeded to say. She had a kitchen knife protruding from her chest, and blood was streaked on the walls and floor. So yes, I'm pretty sure she's dead. We were too scared to tell my mom, too scared to call the cops, because we didn't know how to explain what we saw. We were just stupid teenagers. Had I known what I know now, I would have called the cops right away, but we didn't call them at all. We stayed in pure terror the remainder of the night, and we all swore that we would never tell anyone, but I decided to break that promise today because it's taken its toll on me over the years. I was petrified that entire summer. I was so scared that that man was going to come for me, but thankfully he moved out of the house near the end of the summer. Before he moved, I'd often see him drive by my house so slowly, day or night. I made eye contact with him once, and he gave me the creepiest, most unsettling look, smirking as if he knew my dilemma, that he knew I'd never tell, and that he was free to do whatever. His eyes cold and soulless. I was so happy that day I saw a for sale sign in his yard. I never heard anything about the woman. I searched the missing people's reports in our town for years to no avail. Jennifer, Kara, and I never mentioned it again, and life went on as if it never happened. But the fact remains that we all witnessed the aftermath of a murder, and somewhere out there the killer roams free. So the initial encounter may not be that creepy in itself. It was for me at the time, but what happened after is what makes it creepy. This was a long time ago. I was probably around 8 years old, and I'm 27 now. We were moving house, and the owner of the moving company, it was a small company, so he did a lot of it himself, was at our house. I got this horrible feeling about him. I don't know what it was, but I did not want this man anywhere near my mother. I put myself directly between him and my mom while they were speaking, my back to her, with my arms reaching around her behind me and kind of pushing her back. I don't know what a little 8-year-old girl was going to do if anything happened, but I didn't even want this man talking to my mom, never mind standing near her. Afterwards, my mom asked me about why I was being so strange while he was there, and I told her that I didn't like him. After we had moved, he actually stole some of our furniture, and we were done with him. We heard through someone who also knew him that he had shot and killed his wife and then himself in front of his twin daughters. Those poor children. Ever since then, my parents have listened to me when I say I don't like someone, or I get a bad vibe from them, and I definitely trust my gut when it tells me something's off. So I'm a 21-year-old female house-sitting this house and watching 2 dogs for my sister's boyfriend's aunt. I don't know them too well personally, but decided the money was worth it. Yesterday I found a camera in the living room. I was not told about being watched. Not to say I was doing anything weird in the living room, but it still creeps me out that I was being watched without my knowledge. I looked up the model number and looked to see what the lights on the camera meant. When it's blinking blue, then I'm actively being viewed. Now all I can notice is how countless times a day the light starts blinking blue, and I know I'm being watched. They want me to stay here with the dogs, and I have 2 more days to go, but I feel so unsettled. So this happened about 10 years ago. I I showed up at a friend's house at 6 p.m. to play some D&D after we'd been planning on it earlier that day using Facebook chat. I'd gotten caught up with something right up until it was time to head out, and hadn't checked my phone for several hours, and it turned out my friend who was hosting was running late and wouldn't be getting there until 7 p.m. So I showed up by myself and knocked on his door. After a few minutes of no answer, I finally checked the messages and saw the time change. Right as I was about to head back to my car, someone else showed up. I knew the guy from different circles, and we talked a few times before, so we struck up a conversation and I found he wasn't there to play. He just had to talk to my friend who was hosting the game. Seemed normal enough for the first 15 minutes or so, but then he started to act very odd. He started to pace back and forth and got a wild look in his eyes, kind of like he was nervous about something. I asked what was up, and he almost jumped back with his hands up and said, "You need to calm down." His eyes were wide as he said this to me. I was confused and asked what he meant, and he just started shaking his head and repeated himself, "Really? No, you just need to calm down." And he seemed a bit more agitated while staring at me. This was odd and kind of creepy to me, so I said, "All right, I'm calm," and I just backed up and pulled my phone before pointedly ignoring him. He seemed to calm down at this, and there was just an awkward silence for a couple of minutes before we heard someone else drive up and get out of their car. It was about 6:30 at this point, and one of my friends from the group chat who thought they were running late for the game came up. He asked what was happening, and the other guy immediately pointed at me and said, "Hey, you need to calm him down. He's acting crazy." There was some clarifying questions, and the other guy expounded on how I was acting angry. My friend and I exchanged raised eyebrows, and I just shrugged while shaking my head, feeling relieved that someone else was finally here. He started to laugh a bit at the absurdity of the situation, but then engaged the other guy in some conversation. It was about 6:40 p.m. at this point, and I'd had enough and just decided to go wait into my car until other people started to arrive. Finally, other people started showing up, and I went inside, and once the other guy had left, my friend came up to ask the whole story from my side. He laughed as I told him what happened, not in a condescending way, but a "wait, really?" kind of way. He still thinks it's one of the weirdest yet funniest absurd situations he's come across. I still remember the look in the other guy's eyes. His behavior wasn't normal and very scary. Thank you guys for watching and listening to the end. If you would like to have your story featured on an upcoming video, email the email in the description box below. I want to ask everyone to please work on some Halloween stories for this month. This is the greatest month of the year for all of us horror fans. Until we meet again, stay sinful.
G'day mates, it's B-Buster here, and I would like to give Best Fiends a big shout out for sponsoring this episode. So, have you ever just disappeared without a trace and your family has begun wondering where you are? Well, I did that the other day after I ate breakfast to score a little bit of extra time with Best Fiends. Others may wonder where you got off to, but if you're having as much fun with Best Fiends as I am, then it's no secret why you're sneaking off to play. With Best Fiends, you play through an actual storyline, which helps with the satisfying feeling of progression. It's also an awesome brain-boosting puzzle game that is great for downtime. I really like playing it when I'm on a long trip somewhere, stuck on a train or in a car or something. There are tons of unique fiends to collect, and with offline play, even when you're stranded, you have something to keep you entertained. Best Fiends is now my go-to game at night too, when I'm chilling in bed and I can't sleep. And not to brag, but I'm over 1,000 levels in now and I still can't put the game down. In fact, 30 minutes can feel a lot like 30 seconds with how much fun I'm having. There are tons of levels with new challenges coming online all year round, and with thousands of levels to chew through, there is always something new to do. It's also free to download and is endless amounts of fun. So, download your new favorite getaway, Best Fiends, for free today on the App Store or Google Play. You'll even get $5 worth of in-game rewards when you reach level 5. That's friends without the R. Best Fiends. So I'm from Australia, and when I was 8 years old, my family lived in a house off the Pacific Highway. It backed off to bushland and had quite a large backyard, I suppose. But I used to play outside all the time because of this. One day I was outside as usual as well and heard my mum call my name, so I ran inside to see what she wanted, hoping that it was lunchtime. When I got there, she was busy washing up and she said, "Where are you off to in a hurry?" She had been watching me from the kitchen window, which overlooked the backyard. I said, "You called me in." She said that she hadn't called me in though, and that I must have imagined it. I just thought that she was messing with me at first and said, "Come on, Mum, why'd you call on me?" She stopped what she was doing and looked down at me and said, "Sweetie, I didn't call you. Maybe you just heard the neighbors yelling and it sounded like me." But I was adamant that it was her. It sounded exactly the same as the hundreds of other times that she called me. I started to get a little bit grumpy at this and said that it was definitely her. But she told me to go back playing and that lunch would be ready soon. This is when I started to cry and demand that she stop messing with me. Suddenly I had her attention and she asked why I was so sure that it was her. I told her the reasoning, that it sounded exactly like her. She eventually comforted me and convinced me that it must have just been my imagination. The next week went by as normal as well until one night I awoke to a tapping or a scratching noise. I looked around and when my eyes adjusted to the light, I couldn't see anything in my room, so I just assumed that it was an animal in the walls or the roof. Possums quite commonly come into the house for warmth and to nest in Australia, so I tried to get back to sleep. It went on though for what felt like maybe half an hour, so I looked around again and listened closely to the noise. And that was when I saw something in my peripherals at my window. I gazed over and saw what to this day still gives me chills. It was a thin figure, about 2 inches wide. It had elongated arms and fingers, all black and white eyes. It was tapping on my window while staring at me. I stared at it for a moment, not believing what I was seeing, thinking that I must just be dreaming or something. But for some reason I just felt like it was toying with me, like it was saying, "I'm coming to get you." Fear took over at that point. I stuffed my head under the blankets and I screamed as loudly as I could for my mum. I didn't stop screaming as well and didn't hear my mum come in, and when she grabbed the blanket to see what was wrong, I jumped back thinking that whatever the heck was outside my window had somehow got in. She asked me in a frantic sort of way what was wrong. I pointed over to the window and said, "That," but it was gone, and she asked me what it was. I explained what I had saw, slowly as I was trembling and could barely get the words out to describe it. She said that I could come and sleep in her room. I didn't get any sleep that night, nor the next few nights afterwards. I can still see the image in my mind as well as clear as the night that it happened, 18 years ago. It has made me afraid of the dark, and to this day I still sleep with the lights or the TV on. I've tried to rationalize it. I've tried to find answers in paranormal sightings, folklore, or Dreamtime stories here. I thought I actually found the answer about 5 years ago when I learned about Mimi spirits. They resembled what I saw at first until I read it and it discussed with elders that they're sort of small and shy and are in no way harmful. Apparently they look after the land and don't like interacting with other beings, so obviously I crossed that off the list as a possibility. And to this day, I still have no idea what it was. But I have a feeling that it was the thing that called my name that time, mimicking my mother's voice. It's obviously made me think that it's much like a skinwalker. However, we really don't have any tales of those in Australia. The closest thing to that here is the bunyip, a shapeshifter that lives in billabongs and attacks passing travellers. And well, there's just no bodies of water nearby, so I also crossed that off. Obviously, I've thought that maybe it was all in my head, that my mother was right and it was just my imagination. Yet, still, the image is so strongly imprinted in my mind, as is the voice. To be completely honest though, I still have no idea if it was real or if it was something trying to lure me away or what it was. What I do know though is that I will remember it until the day that I die. In July of 2019, I was leaving a co-worker or a friend's house, a 4th of July party. It was about 10:45 p.m. It was me, a 36-year-old female, my husband, 54-year-old male, and our then 9-year-old daughter. It was in a town about 45 minutes drive from home, mostly down country roads that I didn't know, so I was using my GPS. Now, this area of town basically rolls up the streets, so to speak, at 5, so the roads were mostly deserted with only a few cars passing every now and then, and absolutely no cars in front of or behind us. When all of a sudden this very dark vehicle, I think it was a hunter green or maybe a dark grey, pulls up behind us and starts to tailgate my car. I don't normally speed more than 5 to 6 miles per hour over the speed limit, so someone tailgating me is not really unusual, I suppose. The longest stretch of this 2-lane road before being able to hit the highway was a sort of winding tree-lined road. There was this big curve in the road, almost a hairpin turn that was not as sharp, so you could almost see a mile in the distance from where you entered that section of the road to where you came out of it, and there were no turn-offs, no shoulders to stop on, nothing, just road and trees. When I entered the huge curve, the car was still right on my tail, not flashing, not weaving, not using the horn or anything, just still following right on my tail. So, all of a sudden, I look in the rearview mirror and the headlights from the car that was tailgating me were gone. I didn't see any parking or marker lights. I didn't see any tail lights. I looked back as far as I could see and I couldn't see that car anywhere. I mentioned this to my husband and he started looking around behind us and didn't see them anymore. They were just gone. Again, there was just nowhere at all to stop and turn around or turn off or anything. I quickly turned my attention to the directions on my GPS and forgot about that car though. And about a half a mile after the huge curve in the road, there was a stop sign, where I had to take a left onto the road that leads to the highway, and closer to civilization. When I stopped at the stop sign, there were no cars coming or going in either direction. But just as I was about to hit the gas and make my left turn, there was a knock near my back driver's side window. I looked on my side mirror but didn't see anything. I heard another knocking sound, closer to the same spot, but more on the metal of the car and not quite on the window now. My husband started turning to look back, and I asked my daughter if she saw anything, but neither of them did. So I said, "Oh well, guess we're just hearing things," and I made the left-hand turn and kept on going. But as I made my left turn, I glanced back at the entrance to that road one more time, and there were a pair of headlights lighting up the road, right where my car had just sat, and 2 people, I was too far away to make out details, were returning to the dark-coloured vehicle that I had seen before. Now, I can't say this for sure, but I'm almost positive that had I opened my window or door to find the source of the knocking, something horrible would have happened to my family and myself that night. So what if Sherlock Holmes' most villainous nemesis was actually an innocent man? Well, don't miss the new Audible original, Moriarty, The Devil's Game. It's a bold new addition to the Sherlock Holmes universe, starring Dominic Monaghan from the Lord of the Rings trilogy and Lost in the title role. Moriarty turns one of literature's most famous rivalries on its head. It pits genius against genius in an epic origin story that recasts Professor James Moriarty as a desperate fugitive framed for murder, hunted by dark forces who will stop at nothing to exploit his brilliance. With Sherlock Holmes, Scotland Yard, and the British Crown closing in on him, Moriarty must confront the ultimate question: what will it take to prove his innocence? And if he succeeds, what will he become? I particularly appreciated and enjoyed the amount of sound effects and the immersive atmosphere that the story incorporates. For instance, the subtle movements of the characters can be heard as they talk over tea, and as someone who has incorporated a lot of sound effects into stories myself, I know just how much effort has gone into making this series just perfect, and it was a real treat to just kick back and listen in a dark room at night. Moriarty, The Devil's Game. It takes a villain to create one. Visit audible.com/listen to Moriarty and listen now. In 2014, I moved to England from Canada to gain work or travel experience, and also to find myself. I ended up living in Essex with 3 other roommates. They were all women, all a bit older than I was. I was 24 at the time. Megan was 31, Cherry was 34, and Cassie was 38. Megan was from New York, and Cherry was from New Jersey, and Cassie was from Poland. All 4 of us shared this 3-story flat. The back of our home was the living room and kitchen. The back wall was complete glass that looked out into the garden. The garden was completely fenced in, and the house had an interesting dynamic to say the least. Tons of stories from that time in my life, but I'll stick to this one. So, I adored all of my roommates, except for Cherry. After living with Cherry for 7 months, I was over her antics. One day, I came home from work. I locked the door, make myself something to eat, and go up to bed. I brought some work home with me, so I'm in my nightie with all these papers around me and my headphones on, jamming out. I had headphones on because Cherry was out to dinner with work friends. That meant booze, and then soon after, that a tantrum was surely to come. I just didn't want to have to listen to her crazy scream crying that night. I'm working away, completely focused, until I feel something. I look up to see a man standing over me. I don't register it right away and passively say, Cherry's room is on the 2nd floor, and continue to work. Cherry regularly brought strange men home, but he doesn't leave. Again, I say, Cherry's room is downstairs, He then interrupts. I'm not here for Cherry, he says. A cold chill iced my veins. My fight or flight kicked in just then, and I started surveying the situation. I look him up and down. He has a bottle of Prosecco in one hand and a knife in the other. He's about 5'10", wild muddy brown hair, and really black eyes. He has a light polo shirt on, and the side of his collar is popped up, a distinct Manchester accent. Once I focused in, I realized that his eyes were black because his pupils were completely dilated. I was in trouble. I needed an escape plan, but unfortunately, this man was standing in between me and my bedroom door. Obviously, I needed to get downstairs, but I needed for him to think that it was his idea. So, I decided to play along. Just then, he uses his knife to pop the cork. Presco is starting to flow out onto my carpet. I said, "Oh no, let's clean that up. I prefer to drink out of proper flute anyways." He nodded, replying, "Yeah, you're a proper classy bird, let's go." I try to act as natural as possible. I try not to show that I'm shaking all over and try to gain control over my breathing. We take the long journey down to the main floor of my flat, all 3 floors. He has the back of my nightie bunched up in one hand, and I could feel the point of the knife graze my back with his other. I was trying to playfully speak with him as he walked down the stairs. I couldn't tell you what I was saying. I was most likely just rambling, I think. I couldn't really hear anything, too, over my heart beating in my ears. We get to the bottom of the stairs, and there's a hallway to my left that leads to the front door. On my right, which is much closer to us, is the kitchen and the living room. We make our way into the kitchen. I point to the cabinets that we had the wine glasses in. He said that he knew where they were and started heading towards them. I now had the kitchen table in between us, and it was time to run. I burst into a sprint down the hallway towards the door. My hands fumbled over the locks, shaking and sweating. I swing open the door and see 2 men walking across the street. They must have been walking home from the train or something. There was a big train station in front of our home. I call out to them for help, and suddenly I'm flung onto the ground. Little pebbles pierce my skin, sending sharp pains where they jabbed. The intruder pushed me out of the way to run and escape. One of the men chased after the intruder, while the other said for me to go inside while he surveyed my home and called the police. I locked the doors and I called the cops. While I'm on the phone with dispatch, I manically run around the house to double-check all the windows and the doors are shut. Suddenly, I hear a loud bang on my door. I inform the dispatch of the banging, and she informs me that police weren't there yet. I thought it might be one of the gentlemen who helped me, so I go to look out the eye hole, and it's him, the intruder. He came back. He's banging on the door, screaming that I had his glasses and that he was not done with me. I absolutely freaked out, obviously. The dispatcher attempts to calm me down, but I'm losing my ever-loving mind over this. She then said, "They're pulling onto your street now. You should hear their sirens." And I did. Thank God. The intruder then blasts off. One officer jumps out of the passenger side while the car is still moving and chases after him. The second officer comes into my home and he interviews me over the course of some time, and the two gentlemen. Collects evidence, takes photos, all that stuff. After some time of him being there, Cherry comes home and freaks out. Once the situation was explained to her, she said, "Oh, that could have been me." "Yeah, thanks, Cherry. It's all about you, right?" The next morning, I'm called in to identify a man that they had in custody. I pointed him out. I go into a little room and the officer pulls out an evidence bag. He asked if the items were mine, and they were. They were my underwear and photos taken from my home. The officer then informed me that the intruder had apparently been stalking me for some time now. He estimates at least 3 months, and he had made a nest outside of our home on top of a hill that looked over into our living room and kitchen even. He's apparently a known offender and drug dealer. He then told me how lucky I was to get out practically unharmed, because apparently others weren't so lucky. So I've been searching for some semblance of similarity in somebody else's encounter for 3 years now, hoping that another's experience might align even a bit with my own to validate it. Until last night, I'd found details aligning with my own encounter, but nothing I felt concrete enough to make my story not sound absolutely insane. It still does sound a bit insane, I know, and I have no way to further explain any of it. So all I have is what I witnessed. I did find a story on here from like 18 days ago that sounds eerily similar to my own though. The key difference being the familiarity of the voices mimicked, leading me to wonder if this thing had been watching us for a while. Anyway, so I was living in West Texas in this national park where the restaurant I was working at the time rested at the top of a 15-minute hike of a mountain trail from the housing that they had us in. I closed up the restaurant after everyone left each night, so I was always an hour or two later coming down the hill than everybody else. Usually it was pretty empty, really quiet. Pretty uncommon to encounter anyone else, as the only thing at the top of the mountain is the closed restaurant, a gift shop, a store, and some of the trailheads. There isn't much reason for anyone else to be on the trail at that hour. And this one night, I'm coming down. No moon, so it was completely pitch black, empty trail, characteristically quiet. I round this last bend to get to my house, and right before I get off the trail to take a shortcut through the thicket of the cactus and brush, there were maybe 15 to 20 trees. Even though it's a desert, the top of the mountain has a high Sierra microclimate. When I hear my best friend or roommate call out my name, clear as day, in the other direction. He said my name, and when I turned, said it again. In retrospect, though, it sounded, I don't know, funny. It was close, 15 yards maybe, but it sounded sort of far off at the same time. Like if somebody recorded his voice from far away but played it very nearby. It just sounded off, but not enough to flip a switch immediately, and maybe I'm painting the memory of it differently than what it actually sounded like. So I'm facing my house, maybe 50 yards away, and the voice comes from directly to my left, on this foothill of the mountain that we'd hike around on sometimes. It has so much more tree coverage than the trail that I was on, and considerably more than the thicket separating me from the clearing surrounding my house. If you walked 5 feet in the direction the voice came from, you'd completely disappear from the view of anyone on the trail or on the back porch of the house, like immediately. So, hearing my friend's voice calling me over, I was like, oh, cool, we're night hiking. And I turned to follow it. But right before I take my first step into the tree line, I hear his actual voice down on our porch saying, "Hey, who are you talking to?" which obviously stops me. I turn back to my house, confused, just in time to see this, and it's really hard to explain, but thing burst out of the thicket that I was just about to shortcut through to begin with before hearing this first voice and turning away. And from the exact spot I had walked down every single night, this thing just bolts. It was humanoid technically, but it was tall and way too skinny to be a human. Like at least 8 feet tall, but super slim. It looked inhumanely slender, in fact. It was hunched over and running like it burst off of a track mark, that sort of thing, but kept that same form the whole time, never got all the way upright. As for the colour, that's always really messed with me because, for one, I'm really colourblind, and for some reason it was like greenish, sort of yellow, and I get greens and yellows mixed up a lot. It had a hue of green and yellow though, at least, and it looked like it was giving off its own sort of, I don't know, like glow or something, which has always sounded so absolutely ludicrous. I never tell anyone that I do not absolutely trust to give me the benefit of the doubt before thinking that I'm just making the whole thing up. Because if I heard this story, I would honestly think that somebody at the very least might be confused or something. Anyway, our back porch light was on though, and the thing lined up with where it would have been shining, so if this thing was translucent, it definitely could have taken on that, like, sheen by reflecting the porch light. The colours did kind of line up, I guess. If you'd reflected the light, it may have looked like this thing's colours, I suppose, but it certainly wasn't identical. Honestly, though, I could have sworn that it had its own shine to it, like looking at a glow stick that's sort of dying off. More than enough to see, but still kind of faint. Regardless, it was a light that definitely wasn't there a second before when I'd gotten to the shortcut. It would have stuck out for at least 50 yards of the walk. It should be noted too, had I followed that thing's voice, 2 things probably would have happened. 1, I would have completely disappeared from the view of anyone, and 2, I would have turned my back on whatever that thing was and entered into a thicket of trees, weeds, and cactus far too dense for me to turn around, run, or fight back, or pretty much anything. Also, that trail that I would have been gone towards leads directly to the edge of a cliff that drops down into a massive break in the mountain. It cleanly drops all of like 6,000 feet to the wide open desert below. That could be the purpose of that direction, maybe. Who knows? To be honest though, if I was going to try and do some nefarious stuff, it would be the perfect place to both find someone and lead them quickly to a spot where no one else would come up on you. Legit, in the middle of the day you could probably make someone disappear over there if you wanted. It really wouldn't be that hard. Anyway, how this thing was running, it immediately felt like I'd spooked it. Like how a deer runs off at a noise, but this was different in that it seemed a lot more, I don't know, determined? It seemed intelligent, aware of its own movement, not just acting out of instinct. Kind of like spooking a person if they'd seen you watching them from the bushes or something. Like spooked but sentient and definitely acting like I just foiled some nefarious plan. So naturally, I also bolted, exposing my back to this thing but taking the opposite, slightly longer way to my back porch. My buddy, and bless his soul, is still there when I make it, and he asks again, "Who are you with?" His face is just as confused, and he keeps looking past me, and I'm like, "You heard it too, right?" And he says, "Yeah, where are they?" And I was like, "What? There were multiple?" Apparently, from his perspective, he had heard multiple voices alongside of my own, all carrying on and joking around, talking back and forth pretty loudly. He said that there were at least 3 other voices talking to mine, but that it sounded like a whole crowd coming down the trail. He said that he could clearly hear us getting closer, and for the past few minutes, it just assumed that I'd run into a hiking group and were talking with them as we headed down. Which is not the most uncommon thing in the daytime, but pretty uncommon for that hour of night. It took me a minute to show him that I wasn't messing with him and that I had not just split off from a group of hikers. I was completely alone and had not vocalized a word until he called up to ask, "Who are you with?" It took a second to even express my side of what was going on, I was so out of whack, I couldn't find the words to actually explain, so I just kept shouting, "I swear I just heard your voice," and then, "This thing, dude, this thing," or something like that. Eventually it registers that there were no lights on the trail. I wasn't using a flashlight that night, so maybe there was actually some moon out, and I just heard his voice calling me off trail and into the dark, and we both began trying to figure out what the heck we'd just witnessed. Now, this part might be a little crazy, but I'm not implying anything, I'm just saying. This is what I'd been doing on the walk down before this happened, so obviously walking home solo, I hadn't actually said a word. Whoever he heard was certainly not me, and I certainly didn't come with a crowd. But I had been praying like crazy on the hike down. There had just been this super dark sort of negative energy in the house lately, and I was trying to kind of, surround myself with light and positivity, I guess, asking God to give me strength before I walked back in, and out of nowhere, midway through the trail, I got this, absolutely overwhelming joy, almost like ecstasy. I was, screaming inside, happy, and just felt like I could take on the whole world, basically. No matter what came, I could take it. Maybe I'm implying something because call me crazy, but I've always felt like that had something to do with how the night turned out as opposed to how it maybe would have. I don't know. I know that part really does make me sound insane, but so does the rest of it, to be honest, so whatever. I certainly don't think that it was a coincidence, though. I'm just not sure what to make of, any of it, really. And that's pretty much it. The only other thing is our memories of it, really. Out of nowhere, I just sort of stopped thinking of it. Not forgot it, but it was hidden behind some sort of a thick fog in my head. The next morning, I told my friend the story, and she uncharacteristically shut me down and just said something like, "You're all just crazy and getting scared of these mountains," and just walked away. It really wasn't like her, though, to just dismiss somebody like that, especially a friend, without even hearing them out, too. She was a really empathetic lady, and again, call me crazy, but it seemed like something that triggered a memory in her that she refused to touch and shut it down before it got too close. I could be reading into it, I admit, but that's happened a couple of times with this story, and we'd been living on that mountain off and on for a few years at that point, and had never once heard or seen anything remotely similar to that thing. Until that night, we'd never even heard a story even vaguely resembling that. I mean, it just wasn't like we got spooked of our own house or the trail that we took twice a day every day, and it wasn't like we were seeing and hearing things based on stories that we'd projected into the darkness, But the absolute weirdest thing happened the moment that she walked away. It was legit like a fog just slowly poured over the memory, and the last time I remember thinking of it was that moment, and then it just disappeared for months. How in the world does something that massive, that frightening, happen in your life and you just stop thinking about it? And then one day, it just popped back up. I was honestly so surprised and unsure of how I hadn't thought of it in so long. It was almost more baffling than anything we actually witnessed. I asked my friend just before I sent this and if he'd felt the same fog thing, and he said absolutely. He doesn't really like talking about that night, honestly, and he's told me that I cannot help but bring it up as often as possible, hoping by talking it through that we'd find some sort of explanation for, any of what happened. Even as I share this, though, I felt like I'd asked him a million times already and just forgotten his answer. Maybe I have, and I've just forgotten or had that fog thing happen again. I don't know. I'm getting all confused, and this whole thing is just crazy, I know. But that's pretty much everything. I'm sorry if this was really confusing and all over the place, but I really felt like I needed to convey as absolutely many details as I could possibly remember, just in case somebody listening to this had any sort of experience with any part of it. A mimic, a humanoid, or the memory loss, or anything. I really don't know what to make of all of this. All I have are the details of that night, and my foggy memory doing something bizarre afterward. I've never known what to make of it, but I just figured maybe somebody else might be in the same boat as me and maybe need to see some sort of validation. Just validation, I guess. Anyway, thanks for listening, and it's good to finally speak about this, even if it's just over the internet.